for those that don't know, I spent 5 years in mainland China working in a garment factory that specialized in like activity-specific technical apparel that was primarily for enthusiast brands, we'd call them, so like cycling, hunting, fishing, running, and workwear was a main part of our business as well. And we had 2 factories, one in mainland China and one in Vientiane, Laos. They were both about equal size, about 2,500 workers. And while I was there, I learned a ton, a lot of that foundationally that helped us be successful in 1620. But what I did see was brands already at that time, really chasing the lowest duty possible. And so there were several countries across the globe that, whether it was to the United States or to the European Union, these big global brands were producing certain products in certain countries that fed certain markets based on the lowest duty. And this like duty engineering became a pretty popular, I would say, department in most of these major global brands to try to have savings that can be in the multi-million-dollar a year if the brand is big enough and you do it right. So mind you, apparel in the U.S. has had pretty high duties. One of the highest ones is, and most people don't know this, is anything that basically is pulled over your head, a t-shirt, a hoodie, is 32%. There's a few fabric categories where like wool is a little bit less because we don't have a ton of domestic wool, but 32% is still a lot. So if you're buying a t-shirt for $1 and you have to pay an additional 32 cents to the government to import that t-shirt. And that's basically, it's been in I don't know, for hundreds of years, 100 plus years, but it's pretty fair. And then on the flip side, things like seam sealed or any fabric that has a coating on it that's waterproof or rainproof only has a 7% duty. And that's because we don't have an industry here for Gore-Tex jackets and ski wear and stuff like that, just because those are highly labor intensive, and a lot of that manufacturing, the evolution has happened in Asia. That wasn't something in the 80s that we were doing here. It's kind of a relatively new construct. So it's been interesting, and then these last few months on the duty side has been, interesting to see it evolve and understand. Certainly last week, the bombshell, but how hard a lot of people had worked to, navigate and find the most preferential duty thing or duty supply chain for their product mix, and then to kind of see that met head on with a brick wall last week was really interesting. What was proposed last week would have been detrimental. Deep down for Made in USA, it's the best thing that could ever happen. But, also knowing that it's probably the worst thing that could ever happen in the history of, consumer the last 200 years. If they, these tariffs at this rate go on. Because the brands haven't had a chance to plan for them. Like ultimately, the cash crunch required to pay some of these tariff bills immediately that wasn't planned for. Brands don't have 50% margin laying around, regardless of if the supplier absorbs the cost, some of the cost is passed on to the consumer, the brand absorbs some of the cost. It's also a cash flow issue of being able to pay an extra 50% to be able to just import your goods when in a lot of these brands, again, and the industry, apparel, toys, books, luggage, whatever it is, this is all financed by banks and financed by inventory financing, and they get dating from their suppliers of 30, 60, 90 days. So their cash flows are planned around this structure, and then being able to have a 50% tariff bill due immediately or face bankruptcy is pretty would have been really disastrous for the entire consumer product good industry. We survey customers. We talk to a lot of folks about Made in USA and demand for Made in USA, and everyone wants it. 60, 70% of people, of course, say they prefer to buy Made in USA, and then only about 20% of people are willing to pay more for it. So you have this delta of people like in, they have a lot of good intention, and then they're not willing to pay double. But I think, tariffs in the long run that will help our products be more competitively priced, because at the end of the day, a lot of this, whether it's direct-to-consumer, e-com brands, they're just really arbitraging cheap labor offshore, right? Like the fabric's a commodity. It's the same price if we get a cotton fabric here or in Asia, and we've done the math on that. And the main difference is that they're arbitraging cheap labor, and we're paying fair wages significantly higher than the federal minimum wage here in the U.S., and we're proud of that.
Yeah, absolutely. How will the consumer feel that? How will it impact their wallets and purchasing decisions?
Yeah, you just take a brand like Nike, for example, that, I feel the products for, what they trade on the secondhand market for, like their retail prices are very undervalued, right? You have sneakers selling for $300 or $400 that, we get resold for 10 times that. And those now are going to be, if they're coming out of China, which a lot of these higher end shoes are coming out of South China, and a couple of factories that have really excelled at making high end sportswear, athletic footwear, and if they're coming out of China and the duty's 125%, those are going to be like, there's no way that a Nike or any of these large brands, any brand can absorb that. So it's going to be passed on to the consumer. Maybe the factory can absorb a little bit, but the structures of how these factories operate is they're not necessarily, they operate on high volume. They don't operate on high margin, right? So inevitably, there's no chance it won't be passed on to the consumer. Now, a 10% margin, a 10% tariff, like the universal ones, they're going to feel that maybe a few percent gets passed on to the consumer. When you look at like the American-made apparel space and you look at denim, the average price of an American-made jean is $250, right? Our double knee is $198 and has significantly more features and benefits. The fabric's far superior to like a normal selvage denim. So, there's a lot more value in the products that we're selling, I think, than traditional, even like made in USA casual menswear. And so, we're committed to delivering that to our consumer, which we know is seeking long-term value.